Hello, and welcome back to another video where we dive deep into the top 5 saddest backstories from across the Squid Game universe. Don't worry, this won't be your typical video featuring the usual names like Gi-hun and Sang-woo. As much as I appreciate how well those characters were written, the harsh truth is that their backstories aren't all that tragic. And even if I get hate for saying this, both Gi-hun and Sang-woo ended up where they did because of their own poor life choices. They were responsible for their downfall and their decision to enter the games. The most generic one on this list, if we can call it that, is In-ho. The frontman arguably has one of the most heartbreaking backstories in the entire series. He started as a promising young police officer and ended up as the orchestrator of those deadly games. How did such a dramatic transformation happen? It's honestly a shame we don't have more information about his past and the reasons he lost hope in humanity. I personally believe Netflix deliberately left his backstory vague to leave room for a potential In-ho spin-off and to cash in on it later. From the little we do know, it's clear that In-ho wasn't inherently evil. He's a man who gave up on the system. In his eyes, the only way for the world to become good was to eliminate the root of the problem, to rid society of what he saw as its trash. In his twisted logic, he believed there was something noble in what he was doing. But let's take a look at his backstory and the events that led to this mindset. In-ho was a former officer who donated one of his kidneys to his younger brother, Jun-ho. Not long after, he received devastating news. His wife had been diagnosed with acute liver cirrhosis. During medical testing, doctors also discovered she was pregnant. Despite being advised to get an abortion, she chose to risk her life and carry the pregnancy to term. A liver transplant was urgently needed to save her. But it was expensive. Desperate, In-ho borrowed money from criminals to cover the cost. But as a police officer, these transactions were mistaken for bribery, and his superiors fired him. With no other options left, he entered the games. He eventually won. But tragically, by the time he returned, both his wife and his unborn child were already dead. Imagine enduring all those horrors, killing every remaining player to save your loved ones, only to find out you were too late. Imagine the shock of realizing you sold your humanity for nothing. And to make matters worse, his brother, the very person he donated a kidney to, didn't try to understand him. Instead, Jun-ho judged him like everyone else, assuming he'd accepted a bribe. With nothing left, it's no surprise that In-ho accepted Il-nam's offer. That's why he takes the number 5 spot. He doesn't just have a tragic backstory. He was molded by society into becoming the frontman. He embodies the idea of embracing the darkness of humanity with no hope for redemption. At number 4, we have Hyunju. She didn't enter the games because of a gambling addiction or any crippling dependency. She was there because she accepted who she truly was. And if that's not the definition of tragic, I don't know what is. Here's what Hyunju said about her transition. Everything was fine before I told people who I really am. Sure, some people thought I was a bit strange, but I never had any big issues. But once I told people I wanted to live as a woman and started transitioning, everything changed. My mom cried a lot, and my father stopped talking to me. I was fired from my job and lost all my friends. I wasn't done with the treatment and procedures, but I wasn't earning any money, so my debt kept piling up. Although I felt liberated, my life became so much harder. That's why she joined the games. Not because of any past mistakes, but because she wanted to finish her operation and move to Thailand to finally live life on her own terms. The tragedy of her story lies in how society treats transgender people. Whether friends or family, everyone turned their backs on her. She was even kicked out of the military because of her transition. Hyunju proved to be caring and kind to most players she encountered. She was loyal, brave, and protective toward the few close friends she made in the games. A clear example is when she risked her life to help a man alongside Gi-hun during the first game. But despite all those qualities, no one acknowledged her in the real world. And that's why I believe she deserves the number 4 spot for the saddest backstory in the show. For the 3rd spot, we have another tool of the system, the recruiter. Now don't get me wrong, what he did is truly horrifying, and there's no excuse for his actions. He approached desperate people with no other choice and lured them into deadly games, all while smiling. But the tragic part is that his actions become understandable once we learn about his recruitment backstory. Here's what the recruiter said. I used to work at the games, clearing and incinerating the bodies of countless people like you, Mr. Seong. These things aren't human. They're just trash, useless. They have no purpose in this world. That's what I kept telling myself for years, and I worked hard. One day they gave me a gun. I liked the way it felt. It was like someone had finally acknowledged my existence. And I don't know which year it was. There was a man who'd lost, and I went over to shoot him, but I recognized his face. Guess who it was? My dad. I was aiming a weapon at my very own father, and he begged me, tears in his eyes, to spare his life. And so do you know what I did? I shot him. Bang! Right in the middle of his forehead. That's when I knew. I guess I really am cut out for this. What makes his backstory tragic is the fact that he didn't have a choice. He didn't know any better. Having worked in the games from a young age, the recruiter was surrounded by horror and tragedy his entire life, so it's no surprise that he ended up this way. He's not the result of his own decisions, but of a toxic, brutal environment that shaped him into what he became. From this perspective, many of his actions make sense, from calling people trash to being willing to die for his beliefs. That was all he ever knew. And when that's the only reality you've lived, becoming someone like him almost feels inevitable. The number 2 spot belongs to Sae-byeok. The brilliance of characters in Season 1 is unmatched. Seasons 2 and 3 didn't even come close. So why include Sae-byeok on this list, but not Gi-hun or Sang-woo? The answer is simple. Sae-byeok didn't end up in the games because of her own choices. She was there for her family. Her debt had nothing to do with gambling or addiction. It was because of her little brother. Many people don't understand the immense struggles North Korean defectors face in South Korea, but the reality is harsh. To name just a few, they often face marginalization, receive limited government aid, and are rarely hired. When they are, it's typically for low-paying jobs with no security. On top of that, Sae-byeok spent everything she had trying to pay a broker to smuggle her mother out of China, a dangerous, expensive, and emotionally draining mission. She also had to cover the cost of housing for her younger brother, who was living in a children's home because no guardian would take both of them in. Without legal guardianship, no family support, no access to proper education, and no real opportunity for a good job, she was left with no choice but to survive by hustling in back alleys and scraping by. As I said, her story is truly tragic. Unlike others in the game, who were there because of greed, recklessness, or pride, Sae-byeok was there because the system failed her. Her debt wasn't about poor decisions, it was the price of loyalty, of sacrifice, and of trying to hold on to the only family she had left. And finally, taking the number 1 spot for the most tragic backstory in the Squid Game universe is the same person with the most heartbreaking death, Ji-yeong. At first, we thought she was just cold and dismissive, especially toward the priest who kept praying. But as we got to know her, we realized there was a real reason for her bitterness. She was physically abused by her father, who later stabbed her mother to death. In an act of revenge, Ji-yeong kills her father, a crime for which she served time in prison. Sometime after her incarceration, she agreed to participate in the games, with little regard for whether she lived or died, as she felt she had nothing to live for in the outside world. Her father, as Ji-yeong said, was a pastor and begged God for forgiveness while he abused his daughter and hid his wife. Although he did not pray when he killed Ji-yeong's mother, she thinks this is because he knew he wouldn't be forgiven. And as if her past wasn't tragic enough, her death made her story even more heartbreaking. In a game where everyone was out for themselves, she made the most selfless decision imaginable. She gave up her life so that Sae-byeok could live. In a world consumed by cruelty and despair, Ji-yeong was a quiet act of kindness. Her line, "Even if I get out, I have nowhere to go," sums up her entire life in one devastating sentence. And with that, we conclude our list of the most tragic backstories in the Squid Game universe. Let me know your thoughts in the comments. Do you agree with this ranking? Did I forget someone whose story hit you hard? Don't hesitate to share. I'd love to hear your take. See you in the next one.